Well, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar, Selling to E-commerce, the Effects of COVID-19. We have a truly international audience tuning in today from a huge range of industries and sectors, and it's really fantastic to have you all here today. And I wanted to start by saying a big thank you for everyone joining us today. These are truly unprecedented times, and I know many of you will be going through a lot at the moment, so it's great to have you here today. And to that end, I'll do my best to make the next hour or so as insightful and as impactful as I possibly can. So my name's Simeon Atkins. I'm one of the industry consultants here at SimilarWeb, and I'll be your host for today's session. My primary role at SimilarWeb is to help market professionals utilize and understand market intelligence data to discover, close, and ultimately retain business. In today's webinar, we'll evaluate the impact of coronavirus on 4 key e-commerce industries. We'll be looking at consumer electronics, groceries, beverages, and home and garden. And for each sector, we'll analyse the unprecedented market trends, the rapidly changing consumer behaviours, and crucially, what this all means to you and your business, along with key takeaways and recommendations into areas of opportunity during these testing times. Now, here at SimilarWeb, and any of the clients on the call that have worked with me directly will be able to attest to this, we're a big believer in the consultative sales approach. And a big part of this process is putting yourself in your client's shoes and thinking about what's important to them. There'll be a lot of insights that I share today that will be very obviously relevant to you and your business, and some that might not be directly related to your role in your company. But remember that all the insights today will affect your clients in the e-commerce industry. And now more than ever, your clients will be open and receptive to you offering them insights and direction, even if it's not in an area that you can directly help them with. And in doing so, you'll strengthen your long-term relationship. And moving forward, you'll go from being just another commercial partner to a trusted advisor. And if you can play your part in helping your clients through these tough times, even if it's not directly through a solution of your own, you'll start to forge a very strong partnership with your clients. So for those of you that aren't familiar with SimilarWeb, let me give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do. So SimilarWeb provides market intelligence data to help businesses around the world understand, track, and grow their digital market share. We provide insights into over 80 million websites and 3 million apps across 190 countries, analysing over 178 different categories and 350 million keywords. So we're going to open proceedings today with our first poll question. Which one of the sectors that we're analysing today do you think has seen the biggest growth in website traffic worldwide between January and March? Do you think it's consumer electronics, online groceries, beverage delivery, or home and garden? And I'll just give you a few moments to submit your answers. Okay, so well done for everyone that said groceries. This indeed saw the biggest increase in traffic worldwide, growing by 40% between January and March. Home and garden was next with 35%, followed by electronics at 16% and beverages at 9%. So let's start with our first sector of today, consumer electronics. Over the last 3 months, around a quarter of the world's population has gone into lockdown as a result of COVID-19. And as we know, in many affected areas, governments have instructed their citizens to work from home wherever it is possible to do so. The result has been a rise in the demand for home working equipment as people try to replicate their office space at home. And I know personally I was caught very much off guard by the suddenness of the lockdown, having myself been on holiday when our own office shut, and therefore needs to make a number of purchases of equipment that I had back in the office, which was frustrating to say the least. And to demonstrate this sudden and sharp growth in the UK, we've analysed a section of consumer electronics related to home working equipment that people have been searching for, such as webcams, laptops, and keyboards. And we can see a sharp rise in traffic from these keywords during March as the restrictions became tighter and more people have been adhering to the government restrictions. This shift in consumer behaviour was largely to be expected once it became clear that huge swathes of the population would be working from home. The question moving forward is whether this will lead to a more permanent shift towards remote working. Will offices become more accommodating and even encouraging towards their employees working from home? And what effect this will have on e-commerce players within this space? One of the recurring themes you'll hear a lot during this webinar is whether or not certain consumer behaviours will permanently be changed as a result of COVID-19. And this is clearly one of those areas which could see long-lasting changes. Let's now take a look at what strategies vendors within the consumer electronics space are adopting during this period. In the graph, we can see that some of the most popular keywords relating to home work equipment that people have been searching for over the last 3 months include webcams, PC monitors, and laptop stands. Most of the keywords appearing on this graph may not have been standard issue company equipment, such as webcams, but people now want to replicate the feeling of a face-to-face meeting as much as they possibly can. So it's unsurprising to see that this is an especially popular item. To try and capture as much of this traffic as possible, we're seeing an increased number of companies creating dedicated home working sections on their website and producing an increased amount of content around specific products. Take, for example, here, Currys PC World. On their website, we can see that they have created a specific blog post and articles around recommendations and help and advice around working from home. Here we can see they've created an article around choosing the perfect printer, which we can see is one of the most popular keywords that people are searching for. Companies largely do this to increase their ranking on Google for these kind of popular keywords, which help drive organic traffic to their website from consumers with intent. In the US, we've seen companies adopting a similar strategy, with Best Buy and Staples in this example, seeing this work particularly to good effect from last month. So if you're working with customers within this space, there's a few recommendations you can make to help them capture more traffic. You should recommend that they follow the lead of websites such as Currys PC World, Staples, and Best Buy in creating content and dedicated website space specific to home working equipment to help drive more organic traffic. And in addition to this, they should also ensure that product descriptions and images are updated and retagged to include references such as suitable for working from home, for example. And again, regardless of whether this is your area of expertise or not, these simple recommendations could make a big difference to the companies you work with. And ultimately, the more successful they are, the better it is for you. Now, with the sudden and sharp increase in the demand for working from home equipment, the traditional market leaders have been struggling to keep up and match supply with demand. This, I'm sure, will be a very familiar view to many of you who have gone on to one of the big retailers in the last month or so and tried to buy some working at home equipment. Personally, myself, I found monitors in particular were nearly impossible to get hold of anywhere I looked in the first few weeks of the crisis. And we're seeing this impact in multiple countries, which indicates a global shift in consumer behaviour. And as a result, people are searching beyond the usual players they would normally go to. They go beyond the first page in Google when they're searching for the equipment that they need. And because of this, we're seeing a lot of growth in niche pure players within this space who previously would not have been competing for this kind of customer base. Here in this graph, we have 4 examples of pure players and their growth in traffic over the last 3 months within the UK. So the message here is if you already have customers that fall into this space, you can expect to see more payments being made and more parcels being shipped. And if you don't, this is a good pool of customers to be targeting with your products and services right now. In this graph, we can see that demand for specialist equipment, and in this example, gaming equipment, has decreased while more general consumer electronics relating to home working equipment has increased. So as we mentioned before, these companies who would not normally be competing for this kind of customer base, the crisis has opened up a new and potentially very lucrative revenue stream. If you work with specialized consumer electronics companies, you should definitely be making similar recommendations as we saw around creating working from home equipment. In many instances, the product descriptions companies like this could be very technical as the equipment they're selling is very specialized. So instead, they could include more references to working from home equipment to help people find this equipment. It's likely these customers probably don't rank as highly on Google as some of the big players within the market when it comes to home working equipment. So to help increase their visibility on Google and win more traffic, a good strategy here would be to run paid search advertising against some of the most popular keywords to advise them that, hey, we're here, we've got the essential home from working equipment, and what's more, we've got it in stock. The crisis presents a golden opportunity for these pure players to become more front of mind when people are searching for consumer electronics equipment, regardless of whether it's related to home working or not. The suddenness and severity of restrictions put in place has caught a lot of people off guard. A lot of this working from home equipment purchases would not have been planned or budgeted for. And what's more, this is not cheap equipment that you have to go out and buy. A PC monitor and a laptop, for example, could easily set you back several $100s. And I can't imagine many people having a lockdown emergency fund to fall back on, although that could be one of the other consumer behaviors that we see change once this is all over. And as a result, there's been an increase in demand for buy now, pay later options as people look to spread the cost of these purchases. It's a logical process when you have an unexpected expenditure that you need to make. Here we can see the increase in interest to specific buy now, pay later providers, Klarna and Afterpay. Both Klarna and Afterpay offer the ability to spread the cost of your purchases into interest-free installments, which is a great option for those big ticket items such as laptops and PC monitors. So the takeaway here is that by offering some sort of buy now, pay later option is a great way of encouraging consumers to buy big ticket items on your website. So to round off this sector, a few key takeaways. Due to the government restrictions around the world, huge swathes of the population are currently working from home. And as a result, e-commerce players within the consumer electronics space are actively producing more content specifically to home working equipment to help drive organic search around the popular keywords. The traditional market leaders are struggling to keep up with the increased demand for working from home equipment. Because of this, we're seeing a lot of growth in the niche pure players within this space who previously would not have been competing for this kind of customer base. And with a lot of these purchases being both expensive and unplanned, consumers are turning to buy now, pay later options as they look to spread the cost of these expenditures and make them more manageable. So the next sector we're going to have a look at today is groceries. So as recommendations around social distancing, self-isolation, and ultimately lockdowns came into effect, we've seen an explosion in the demand for online grocery shopping. It's probably been one of the standout images of the COVID-19 crisis. Queues going around the blocks, empty shelves, stockpiling of toilet rolls and hand sanitizers. I think wherever you are in the world, you can probably relate to this. Which leads on nicely to our next poll question. Which one of these UK grocery sites do you think has seen the biggest increase in traffic over the last 3 months? Tesco's, Asda, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, or Waitrose? And again, I'll give you a few moments to submit your answers. Okay, so well done for everyone that said Morrison's. They saw a staggering 232% increase in traffic between January and March, which is truly remarkable numbers. So if, like me, you live in the UK, you'll have undoubtedly tried and in most cases failed miserably to secure a delivery or click and collect reservations to one of the big supermarket chains as demand for online grocery shopping increases. It's truly a vicious cycle. You want to obey the social distancing regulations, but you can't for love nor money get an online delivery slot because everyone else is thinking exactly the same thing. To help cope with the increased demand, we see the big supermarket chains in the UK are trying to reduce their customer acquisition by effectively turning off their paid acquisition as they look to control the amount of traffic going to their website. We can see illustrated on the graph immediately at the point at which social distancing measures were put in place in the UK, these websites became so overwhelmed by the demand, we see this dramatic fall in paid acquisition. And it appears that the spend which remains largely comes from the CPGs promoting specific products and offers rather than the supermarkets themselves. Big players in the market struggling to cope with the increased demand. More and more consumers are turning to niche grocery providers for their shopping. It's a familiar story to the one that we saw in consumer electronics. The big players in the market are struggling to cope with demand, and the niche players are reaping the benefits in terms of website traffic. In this graph here, we have 4 examples of niche grocery providers in the UK. We can see at the point in which the UK went into full lockdown, traffic to these websites soared as consumers were forced to look beyond the big supermarkets, who we already saw in the previous slide were already overwhelmed at least a week before this. Bigbarn.co.uk, for example, saw their website traffic grow by a staggering 550% between January and March. However, the demand for online shopping has become so great that even these companies are now struggling to handle the incoming traffic to their website. Here, for example, we can see that the average amount of time a person is visiting farmdrop.com has decreased by 66% in March, which could well be caused due to the lack of unavailability with delivery slots, as we can see here. The less time someone is spending on a website, the less likely it is they'll be making a purchase. So it's vital that these companies are able to adapt in order to make the most of this increase in visits. It's clear that a lot of these companies will be receiving more orders than ever and will need the support of delivery service to help them cope with the increased demand. And something else to consider here is that many of these companies sell products that will require specific requirements such as refrigeration. And as such, they'll need to work with a delivery partner that can cater to these specific requirements. Now, websites and apps are generally built with assumptions around how much traffic they normally need to handle. With niche market players in particular seeing unprecedented and unexpected surges in demand, they're starting to utilize various on-site support softwares to help them cope. We've seen an increase in demand for services such as Qit, for example, who offer virtual waiting rooms that people are sent to before they can access the main website. I mean, I've lost count of the amount of virtual waiting rooms I've visited over the last month or so, trying to get onto any number of websites. It's something that's becoming the new norm during this period. The benefit of having a virtual waiting room software is that it helps to control the amount of traffic going to your website, so it doesn't become overwhelmed with huge spikes in traffic. Another good example of support software are on-site chat and support facilities, which help websites handle more queries from customers in less time. So for companies offering on-site support software, such as virtual waiting rooms or on-site chat, this is a great opportunity to start supporting some of these websites and ensure they're able to cope and capitalize on the huge increases in traffic that they might be receiving. So what we've seen so far is that the UK market is already very mature when it comes to online grocery shopping. And as a result, the system has very little additional capacity to cope with the sudden surge in demand. In the US, however, we're seeing a very different story. Before the crisis hit, a much higher proportion of grocery retail in the US was still made in physical stores rather than online compared to the UK. US retailers have invested significantly in online grocery capabilities, but demand from consumers has not always matched this investment. And as a result, there is excess capacity in the system. And to highlight this point, if we look at the graph mapping paid acquisition for some of the big US grocery stores and compare it to the UK equivalent we saw earlier, we can see that rather than turning off the tap, US grocery sites are largely maintaining and in some cases even increasing their paid acquisition. This tells us they don't see the need to control consumer acquisition, and if anything, they see an opportunity to start increasing it. The crisis provides a good opportunity for retailers in the US to change consumer behavior long term. US stores are increasingly becoming more innovative in their approach to managing online grocery delivery. And a great example of this forward thinking and planning is Kroger. Kroger has a long-standing partnership with Ocado, where they produce large-scale facility centres to help fulfill online grocery orders. And in areas where they don't have their own delivery partners, such as Texas, for example, they work with third parties who will go to the store, collect the goods, and deliver these to consumers' homes. Because Kroger have had these systems and partnerships in place to maximise their online order capabilities, we can see they've invested heavily in paid search to actively try and increase their customer acquisition. And in fact, it was the single biggest driver of traffic to their website in March, which is a staggering contrast to the leading UK grocery sites that we saw earlier. Kroger is a great example of how the US online grocery sector could really flourish and grow long after the crisis has passed, as more and more people enjoy the convenience of having their shopping delivered to them. So to summarize this sector, a few key takeaways. The crisis has led to an explosion in the demand of online grocery shopping as people implement social distancing and isolation measures. The UK is a very mature e-commerce market, and as a result, the big UK grocery sites have little to no excess capacity in the system. With the big players in the market struggling to cope with the increased demand, more consumers are turning to niche grocery providers for their shopping. However, they now in turn are struggling to cope with the increased demand. In the US, we're seeing a very different trend. Because it's a less mature e-commerce market than the UK, there appears to be more excess capacity in the system, with the big grocery retailers maintaining and even increasing their paid consumer acquisition. This appears to be a great opportunity for the US grocery sector to change consumer behavior long term in the US. So on to our next sector, which is beverages. Now, I'm not sure there's been a time where a glass of your favorite tipple has been more appreciated given the stress of the lockdown. Whether it's homeschooling your kids, trying to keep up the levels of exercise in a confined space, or trying to teach your parents how to use Skype, I think we've all earned a nice glass of something at the end of the day. And the closures of pubs, bars, and restaurants has severely limited the way in people can enjoy a drink for the foreseeable future. And what's more, it would be pretty frowned upon to head to your local off license purely to stock up on your favourite drink in the midst of everything going on. And in some cases, these kind of actions have actually led to people picking up fines. So with all this in mind, consumers are looking for alternative ways to get the drinks in. And the obvious alternative is to turn to the online beverage companies to deliver straight to your door. In this graph here, we can see traffic to e-commerce beverage sites have increased by 36% in the UK and 13% in the US, January to March. We see an increase in the variety of alcohol vendors across the board, one of those being wine merchants. In the graph on the left, we can see that searches for wine delivery in the UK skyrocketed by 1,500% between February and March as people look to stock up on their favourite bottles of red and white. And on the right, we can see how online traffic to a number of specialist wine merchants has grown significantly during the increased demand. One of those wine merchants to do particularly well during the period was Majestic.co.uk, who increased their traffic by 154% between January and March. They, like the other companies in this graph, are household names in the UK, which is showing that people are largely turning to the brands they already know and trust when it comes to alcohol delivery. But as we can see here, they're not necessarily in the best position to monetize on this growth, with standard delivery taking up to 14 days in some cases. And in fact, towards the end of March, Majestic was actually forced to temporarily suspend online delivery as they struggled to keep up with the increased demand. Quicker standard delivery times generally have a high correlation with conversion rates for e-commerce sites. Therefore, by not being able to offer quick turnaround in delivery, Majestic risks undoing a lot of the gains they've seen over the last 3 months as consumers become frustrated with the long turnaround of deliveries. So if you're hosting a virtual hour this weekend, for example, a turnaround of 14 days is not going to cut it and people will just look elsewhere. One of Majestic's main competitors in the UK is Laithwaites.co.uk. Although their traffic growth hasn't been as big as Majestic in the last 3 months, by offering 5-day standard delivery, they may be able to capture some of Majestic's consumers who don't want to wait 14 days for that box of wine. As we've spoken about already, it's not enough for companies just to be seeing an increase in website traffic. They must be in a position where they can cope and capitalize on the increased demand. By working with a logistics partner who can help increase with the increased demand, and other e-commerce beverage sites such as majestic.co.uk will be in a much better position to capitalize on this increased traffic during the crisis. Now, across the US, as a result of the lockdown, a number of states are temporarily relaxing their laws around alcohol home delivery. According to MarketWatch, online alcohol sales were up by 243% in March, with liquor and spirit sales up by 75% and wine sales up by 66%. This graph, which represents the sharp increase in people in the US searching for alcohol delivery, shows that consumers are taking full advantage of these temporary measures. One of the vendors to really capitalize on the rising trend has been alcohol delivery service Drizzly, who reported a 300% spike in sales earlier this month. Drizzly software connects consumers to alcohol stores, with deliveries mostly carried out by the stores themselves or through third-party couriers such as DoorDash. Visits to Drizzly's website increased by 92%, while daily app downloads increased by 163% during March. And we can see here that Drizzly has seen an increase in website traffic nationwide, with states like Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina seeing exceptionally big spikes in traffic. As more states allow alcohol delivery during the outbreak, this could lead to long-term changes in consumer behaviour as the public grows used to the convenience of home alcohol delivery. So in times where there's so few certainties, one thing that is certain is it will take a lot more than a worldwide lockdown to stop people having a party. I'm sure this image on the right-hand side will be one that many of you can relate to. And it was actually reported in the Wall Street Journal that group meetings booked specifically for drinking events increased by 296% in March. I don't know whether to be impressed or slightly worried by that stat. And here we can see video chatting app House Party saw a 763% increase in downloads and is fast becoming one of the success stories of the crisis. The bottom graph I find particularly fascinating. We can see how traffic to Zoom.us on a Saturday has gone from being virtually non-existent to seeing exponential growth as people arrange weekend catch-ups with their friends and family. My wife and I are expecting our first baby in June, and we've been regularly attending some virtual antenatal classes. And in a couple of weeks, the organisers are running a virtual party on Zoom for parents in the local area to meet each other. And all this represents a remarkable change in the way that people are using Zoom, which before the crisis would have been for many people purely a business-related tool left behind in the office on a Friday afternoon. So again, just to wrap up this sector, a few key takeaways. Although pubs, bars and restaurants have closed as a result of the lockdown, people's appetite for social catch-ups with their friends and family has not been dampened. Instead, people are moving their gatherings online, with a huge increase in the amount of virtual meetings booked for drinking events. As a result, e-commerce beverage companies are seeing big increases in demand for their services and need to be in a position to capitalize on this, such as offering faster and more regular delivery slots. And in the US, we've seen laws around alcohol delivery loosen in many states. We've already seen a huge increase in the demand for people looking for alcohol delivery options, opening up a huge opportunity for e-commerce beverage sites to take full advantage. And the final sector we're going to have a look at today is home and garden. So as people are forced to stay indoors, we're running out of excuses not to tackle that nagging list of DIY jobs that we've been putting up for months. And to get power matters further, we're now unable to call upon those professionals who might normally have been our first port of call when it comes to painting the bedrooms or putting up the shelves, for example. And as a result, we're seeing an increase in people looking to do their own home and garden improvements. Here we've taken a look at some of the key categories related to home and garden improvements. We can see that there's been a huge growth in gardening and home improvements categories, both in UK and US. Gardening alone has experienced more than 100% increase in traffic in the UK. The US market has seen larger increases than the UK in traffic, both for home improvement and home and garden in general. This could again be the result of the US e-commerce market being less mature than UK, which is pushing more consumers online for the first time. In the UK, the consumer experience tends to be far more omni-channel. It would tend to involve going to both the store and looking online. Whereas in the US, consumers are generally used to visiting hardware stores and making their purchases. We'll first review gardening in more detail and specifically which websites have been contributing to growth in this area. As we can see, a large amount of the growth in this area has been driven by people looking to buy plants, and a number of the websites have benefited as a result. Here we can see that Backer.com has experienced more than a 300% increase in traffic in the US, which is a staggering amount of growth. What's more, they've seen the biggest growth in both the UK and US markets compared to some of their closest competitors. And as we can see here, Backer is indeed an international company, offering shipping to many European countries. However, Backer is not in a position to monetize on the 300% growth in traffic from the US, as they currently don't offer shipping here. A key strategy Backer could take here is working with partners who can help them monetize this traffic. So for example, a payment provider that can help them accept payments in US dollars, or a delivery provider that can help them ship to the US. They could also consider doing an affiliate link to US retailers to refer and monetize some of this traffic. We're now going to look at another example in this category that's seen huge growth in both the UK and US markets, which was home improvements. When we look at the websites that's driven a lot of the traffic and a lot of the growth in this category, you probably expect it to be the classic DIY stores, Home Depot in the US, B&Q in the UK, for example. And actually the biggest increase that we've seen has come from paint manufacturers, which comes as something of a surprise. I'm currently in the middle of painting and decorating our spare bedroom into the nursery for the up-and-coming child, and at no point did I consider going directly to the actual manufacturers of paint that I wanted. I simply went to the usual DIY stores. And because delivery slots were so limited, I actually ended up paying £10 just to get some samples of paint so I could try them before committing to a certain colour. So what we see here is another classic example of consumer behaviour changing significantly during the crisis, and clearly a lot of people that are more ahead of the curve than I am personally. When we take a look at what's causing the increase in consumer interest, we can see that a number of sites such as Sherwin-Williams and Glydian have produced a series of guides and blogs that help people with inspiration for home improvement. And what's more, they have a series of customer experience tools that help you visualize the products and how they'd look in your home. So in normal circumstances, you expect people to go to a hardware store, buy a sample of paint and test it on their own walls. And these tools help us replicate the in-store experience that we're so used to and currently unable to access. An example of this ability is virtually painting your room by simply choosing a color that you want and holding your camera up against the wall. This is definitely something that I wish I'd been more aware of before I wasted £10 delivery fee for my sample paints. And as a result, we've seen huge increases in visits to website traffic for these tools. For example, the Sherwin-Williams Color Snap Visualizer app has seen a 74% increase in monthly active users between February and March. Paint Visualizer, which is Gideon's equivalent, has seen a 70% increase in website traffic, and visualizecolor.com has seen a 34% increase in traffic. The reality is at the moment that companies that rely on in-store experiences alone are going to suffer as a result of the lockdown. So they need to think quickly and carefully about how they replicate some of that in-store experience online. And that's likely going to come through working with vendors who can help them deliver those customer experiences. So if you have a customer that has already invested in some of this software, now is the time to start getting them to actively push it. You can advise them to do an email campaign, for example, to their mailing list, or to make it known that they have this tool available on their website. You should recommend that they make these tools as visible as possible on their website, and potentially even recommend they do some paid search. So when people are looking for paint samples, they'll appear with their offering against that keyword. So to wrap up the sector, a few key takeaways. With the lockdown both keeping people indoors and restricting the ability to call in the professionals, we've seen an increase in consumers visiting home and garden improvement websites as they look to replicate their own projects. Suppliers must be ready to deal with the increase in traffic both at home and abroad. Two key strategies to help here are to work with payment providers that can help accept payments in local currency, and a delivery provider that can help them ship internationally. In both the UK and the US, a big part of the consumer journey is in-store experience. And while that's currently not possible, suppliers are becoming more innovative in their approach and utilizing consumer experience tools to help them replicate the in-store experience and aid consumers in their purchases. So before we jump into the Q&A, let's just summarize what we've covered today. The COVID-19 crisis and the resulting lockdowns and social distancing measures have created some seismic shifts in consumer demands. All four markets we've analysed today have seen growth and opportunities for future growth, both during and beyond the crisis, with consumers having to think differently about how they make purchases. The increase in consumer demand has left many of the traditional market leaders unable to cope with the levels of interest. This has opened up the door for pure players to capitalise on consumers that are being forced to look beyond their regular go-to sites. But increasing website traffic alone is not enough. They, as all e-commerce businesses across the board, must be in a position where they can monetize on the increased traffic they're receiving. And to do this, they'll need to work with a number of partners with a variety of different solutions. Whether it's a logistics company to help websites with unprecedented order volumes, payment providers to help accept international transactions, ad tech companies to help increase organic traffic, or software companies to help manage huge spikes in website traffic, there is a huge opportunity during these testing times. Let's too not forget the consultative sales approach and the opportunity to help your clients in areas where you may not necessarily specialize in, but you can use these insights to help forge long-standing relationships. And finally, we don't yet know what the lasting effects of COVID-19 will be on consumer behavior within the e-commerce sector. What we do know is that consumers are being forced to think differently and think more digitally when it comes to making their purchases. And for less mature e-commerce markets like the US, for example, this time provides the opportunity for suppliers to change long-term consumer behavior, whether that's getting people to regularly buy groceries online or to look for more niche providers in the market who can supply what they need. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Q&A section of this, and we've got a few questions that have come in. So I'm just going to go through them as they've come in. So the first one they've got here is, what's the best way to approach clients about an area in which they can improve their digital market share that I'm not very knowledgeable about myself? That's a great question. And it goes back to that kind of consultative sales approach. I think the first thing that I'd say here is that you're not going to your client and pretending to be an expert in this area. You're simply going to them and offering an interesting insight and some advice around how they can improve their digital strategy. And as I said before, companies in this time are going to be more receptive than ever to these kind of insights. Now, if you currently work with SimilarWeb, you can obviously talk to your account managers about the best way to approach this and some more insights that we've shared. But generally speaking, when you're using the platform, it's just kind of about thinking outside the box and just kind of, I suppose, not trying to stretch yourself too much when you're talking to your clients. If it's not an area that you feel particularly comfortable with, just kind of giving them an overview of what the insight is. They should know kind of how to use that and what to do with it, and they'll certainly appreciate the insight for sure. The next question we've got here is, what do you think the long-term effects of COVID-19 will be on consumer behaviour? Well, obviously I don't have a crystal ball, so I'm not entirely sure. But I think one thing that's for certain is that, right now people are being forced to think more digitally, right? They don't have the chance to go into a lot of these stores as they've closed down. And as we said before, I think a lot of the kind of e-commerce markets that are less mature, such as the US, I think long beyond the crisis, we're going to see more of a shift towards online consumer behavior. I think groceries is a great example of that. I think that we'll see, that sector for the US really start to increase as people kind of, they start to get used to shopping online for their groceries. They like the convenience of it. They can see the kind of things that Kroger.com can offer them. And so I certainly think there'll be a shift, sort of generally speaking, to be more digital. But obviously, we'll have to wait and see in the long term what the effects are going to be. Are there any other markets that you've seen that have had an increase in interest during the crisis, other than the 4 that we've analysed today? So yeah, we've definitely seen some more. One of the examples actually is around pet food and supplies. So one of the trends that we've seen, particularly in the UK and the US, is that a lot of more people are kind of adopting animals now during the lockdown, because obviously they're kind of at home more, they like to have the company, they've got more time to kind of spend with these animals. And so actually one of the big increases that we've seen is around pet food and supplies. So people visiting these websites looking for, dog food, cat toys, whatever it might be. So that's been another kind of very popular sector that's seen, a lot of spikes in increase in traffic, and similar patterns that we've seen before, right? The big players kind of struggling to cope with the increased demand, the more kind of niche mid-market players coming up and taking up a lot of that traffic. So that's definitely another good market to consider. Again, if you kind of currently work with SimilarWeb, I'd talk to your account manager about some more of these opportunities. If you don't currently work with us, again, just have a look at the link in the chat and book a meeting with one of our reps today to talk about that in a bit more detail. What's your opinion of how supermarkets or other sectors deal with new consumers now during the COVID-19 situation, and how do they make them loyal customers? That's a good question. So yeah, increase in the Netherlands. So increase in traffic to the big supermarkets. We're seeing it's not shifting. Okay, that's a good question. Sorry, it's quite a long one. I'm still reading through it. So how are they dealing with new customers? So again, going back to the kind of grocery example that we saw before, what a lot of these websites are doing are they're implementing consumer experience softwares, for example, to help them cope with the increase in demand, because obviously what they don't want to happen is all this, all these new consumers come to their website, they have a bad consumer experience and then leave. So a lot of them are adopting these kind of new softwares and strategies to kind of help with that, cope with that increased demand. As we saw in the UK, a lot of the big grocery sites are effectively turning off their paid search, paid acquisition, because they just can't handle the increase in traffic to their websites. I think once that starts to die down, I think they'll probably start to look to utilize that again. Obviously in the US, we saw a different trend. We saw that a lot of the big grocery providers there were, they have an opportunity to kind of increase that customer base because they have more excess capacity in the system. So it really depends on which market they're operating in and what the kind of specific demands are around there. Okay, good question so far. Okay. Is there any emphatic evidence that gives you conviction that the COVID-19 crisis is likely to cause permanent shifts in consumer behaviours? Good question. The answer to that is no. There's no guarantees about what's going to happen, obviously, post-crisis. But I think we can make some educated assumptions around what's going to happen based on the behaviours that we're seeing now. And like I said before, I think one of those trends is definitely going to be people thinking more digitally and buying online more. And as we said before, markets that are less mature in the e-commerce space, I think are definitely going to benefit from that. I think people are generally going to behave more digitally, but no solid evidence for that. Just some logical explanations and estimations that we can make for that. We just had one more come in. What e-commerce metrics do you think will mark the start of the global recovery? That's a good question. I think it depends on which market and which websites that we're analysing. If we're looking at sort of fashion and apparel, for example, a lot of those websites have seen massive decreases in traffic, to their sites, probably because people just don't have the disposable income to be buying clothes right now. There might not be demand because people aren't going out to buy new clothes. Obviously, when we can start to kind of come through this crisis, we should start to see an increase in traffic going to those websites. If we take the groceries example again, I think when things start to go back to normal, we'll see more normal behaviour around sort of customer acquisition, etc., for a lot of those websites. But again, I'd say this is definitely a great question to ask your SimilarWeb account managers if you have one currently. And again, if you don't, please book a meeting with us in the chat. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for questions now. And just to round off, we've been doing a lot of work at SimilarWeb to find out what's really going on with the coronavirus. And we've got an exciting new microsite that helps you track industries and websites that are being affected the most. And a link to the microsite you can see at the bottom here. We've also got a newsletter with ongoing updates on the changes in the market and consumer trends, which covers a huge range of different industries. And you can sign up for the email digest in the microsite. And also don't forget to follow us on social media, where we'll be putting daily content and insights up there as well. So all that's left to say is thank you very much for joining us for today's session. And don't forget, if you're not a customer currently with SimilarWeb, please do feel free to book a meeting with one of our reps through the link in the chat for your chance to win a free 3-month subscription with us. Take care, everyone, and thank you very much for listening.